see exactly where it was, but the skeletal material was actually piled up, the skull on top, inside the coffin. There are no artifacts found in that burial. And they still continued with this, you know, what's the date? How do we date that? Was it, you know, much later date for this burial, or was it, you know, showing that some sort of Christianity or missionary influence had already infiltrated this village? So Griffin, in the end, for the Brennan site, decided this. He said, I feel that the burial number 1, the 50-year-old with the pipe, which from the physical side has been identified as Indian, and that's, I said I'd bring that up later, so there it is. This is his quote. Was buried by the group who left the physical evidence, fire pits, of their occupancy. The clay pipe and unidentified metal object, there it is again, being evidence, according to my interpretation, that the site is post-European. So what he said is the skeleton, the baby, all of this belongs together at the same time period. Okay? If this 50-year-old with the pipe and the nutcracker stuck inside of it lived in this village site, these fire pits were burned. Ellsworth Cowles disagreed. This is what Ellsworth said. And he's just saying that this is Ellsworth's interpretation up there. He says the Brennan site is an Algonquin camp or small village occupied by for a short while, perhaps 2 or 3 years, from the absence of any evidence of white contact in the village strata and the refuse bins. I should date it previous to the Indasty Cemetery on the Thurston farm. While one of the jars at the feet indicates Iroquois influence, the other is so-called archaic Algonquin shape. And since these could have been coexistent in this village, but recently coming under the influence of the Iroquois again, I believe they fit into the above hypothesis, as do the awls, harpoons, bone beads, and pestle. The burial with the pipe, if Indian, I believe belongs to the period of white contact, possibly around 1750, and would have been intrusive. So, you know, this village site existed a long time ago. Later on in the 1750s, this Indian dies and he gets buried. It just happens to be where this site, this village site, once existed. And then he goes on to say the child's burial seems to belong to the still later date. So again, the white coffin was brought at even a later date than that, probably when the settlers came in. It just happened to be buried where these other two things existed. This gives us 3 occupations, or 1 occupation, and 2 different intrusive burials. So you can see that Ellsworth and Griffin were at odds. And Griffin, after he says what Ellsworth said, he goes right back to his own belief. It says it's extremely difficult to determine the interpretation, which interpretation is correct, and very possibly neither one is wholly correct. As far as was determined by the field work, the site yielded evidence of only 1 occupation, and since I do not find it unreasonable to accept the burials as Indian, my conclusion naturally follows. My interpretation is the PR-42, the Abbey Brennan site, is probably an Algonquin village site, burials showing white contact. I would place the burials at approximately the same date as the rest of the site. Inconclusive. Then he moved on to Murray Farm. And I'll show you this. This is actually a picture of the Society for Pennsylvania Archaeology, who actually came up to visit him during all of this in 1931. And if you look, right here is James Griffin. This is basically just showing the dig site that they dug there. And don't forget to take a look at this cool car out in the background there. And the Murray site, again, is across from Tioga Point over on the west side of the Chemung. There are 6 burials found at BR5, and I'm going to tell you right off the bat, this site is very different from the site we just looked at. Very different. And it has a whole bunch of different things going on that are very notable, I think, and important. Burial number 1 was a female, 18 to 24 years old. No artifacts were found. Ribs, vertebrae, pelvis, scapula, and some long bones were missing. Burial number 2, female, 50, no artifacts. 7 cervical and 1st thoracic were the only vertebrae found. The long bones were buried in one group, and the pelvis lay in about the right position for a fresh burial. Burial number 3, not identified because there are not only no artifacts, but only the skull and a few portions of the skeletal material could be found. Burial number 4, female, 13, no artifacts, and 13-year-old girl, best condition, meaning the bones were pretty much where they should have been. Burial number 5 we're going to come back to. Burial number 6, no artifacts, female, 36 to 47. Skeletal material scattered about, even the skull being made up of scattered fragments. Odd, isn't it? You know, the thing is, in 1916, Moorhead's team came through, the Susquehanna River Expedition. We talked about that a while back. And 57 burials were found at that point, at the same site. And this is what he said. In some cases, a part of a vessel occurred in one grave and other fragments from the same utensil in another some distance away. A number of graves were opened in which there were no skeletons, or at best only a few portions of bones, and some may have been rifled through by whites. Starting to get the idea, aren't you? Griffin said the scarcity of artifacts in BR5, and he also relates to Moorhead's claims on this here. He said, the conclusion reached in the second report of the Pennsylvania Historical Commission by the Secretary of the Expedition of 1916, that the scarcity of artifacts found with the bodies indicates that the group to which these Indians belonged was not in a prosperous condition, is, I think, not justified. It might rather be that the lack of artifacts indicates that the particular time at which these bodies were buried, this group did not place any cultural evidences with their dead. What? I think there's something glaring here. And maybe it's because I'm just simple and I've never really worked a site and put a shovel to the ground, but each person here says, well, it's a cultural thing, why there's no artifacts, and they don't even go into why the bones are all scattered all over the place and missing. And I think Louise Wells Murray could have helped them out if she was still around, because in 1908, she gives them the answer. She says in 1908, it may be said that the first recorded discovery of an extensive Indian burial place at Tioga Point was by Sullivan's soldiers, close to their camp, mentioned in many journals, and an object of interest and amusement to all the troops. And furthermore, the Wilderness War, who actually, this Alan Eckert actually goes into tons and tons of those journals that Louise refers to. This is from August 11, 1779, and actually there was more references to this, but I think you get the point. The hardiness of the troops and their promise for the future was marred for many by the ghoulish grave robbing that was continuing as the men settled in here at Tioga. Although it didn't seem to bother some of the higher officers, such as Major James Norris, who simply commented, whether through avarice or curiosity, our soldiers dug up several of their graves and found a good many laughable